Welcome to a special episode of Chai Talk with Wajatli for the Left Hook Substack, where we're going to step away from doom and gloom for a second. And I recommend if you have 30 minutes, just stay with us. I'm joined by my former editor at Medium, Jon Gluck. Jon Gluck is currently at Fast Company, but he's also been an editor at Vogue and New York Magazine. And he's the author of a new book that just came out last month, An Exercise in Uncertainty, a memoir of illness and hope. Now, why you should listen to this, in my opinion, is Jon, who is sitting right in front of you, who you can all see, is like a medical freak in the best of ways. He might be like Captain America, a super soldier. Jon, he never told me this while he was editing me at the Medium, has survived incurable cancer for 20 years. This man should have, and of course, I mean, there's a Muslim way of saying this. Well, no, you're supposed to live. God wants you to live. But for all intents and purposes, he should have died 18 and a half years ago. And here Jon is, and he still has incurable cancer. And each time they're like, all right, Jon, it's time for you to die. Just somehow fate, Kismet, God, whoever you believe in, says, Jon, here's an experimental drug. You want to try it out? You want to be a halal guinea pig? And Jon says, sure. And then he takes it and he gets like, I play video games with my kids. I feel like, Jon, you're one of that characters who like the life bar goes to red and then you find like a one up and you go, you live again. And then it goes down and then you live again. So he is just every single time it's about to be time up for Jon along the road, he gets like this opening. But think about it, folks. How do you live a full life? Jon was married once he was diagnosed. He just had a kid. How do you live your life? How do you have hope? How do you dream? How do you have joy living with uncertainty and hopelessness? And I think this can apply for so many of us because you're seeing what's happening in our country, right? The dissolution of democracy, the removal of rights, the removal of books, climate change. And it's very easy, Jon, to be cynical and apathetic because it's so cheap and lazy. Hope requires work and also requires exposing yourself to pain and disappointment. And so with that, I welcome you and thank you for reaching out to me. I had no idea you went through this. I give the floor to you for the opening salvo, Jon.
Thank you, Ash. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, the story is, as you suggest, out of nowhere, I was diagnosed with cancer. The quick story there is I was leaving my office one night in downtown Manhattan. I slipped on a patch of ice, and the next morning I woke up and my hip hurt. And I thought to myself, I'm 37 years old. I didn't fall. I just twisted my hip a little bit. Why does my hip hurt so much? I thought, maybe I'm getting a little older and this is what people say happens to you. Pulled a muscle or a tore cartilage or something. A few weeks went by. It didn't get any better. I saw my doctor. He took an x-ray, didn't see anything, gave me a PT physical therapy prescription and sent me home. Fast forward to a year later, my hip hurt. Not only was it not better, but it hurt much worse. I was having trouble getting up and down the stairs, in and out of cabs, picking up my daughter. I had a 7-month-old daughter at the time, my first child. And I went back to the doctor, took an MRI this time. As soon as I got a phone call, and this is how incredibly naive I was. His office called to say, "Oh, Dr. Weiner would like you to come in to talk about your test results." I thought, what a nice guy. In this day and age, doctors actually calling me in to talk face to face about my results. But when I got there, I sort of immediately sensed something was wrong. The receptionist kind of had a grave air about her when she heard who I was, turned around and kind of gave like a little eye signal to the other staff members who took me immediately to examining room, not to the waiting room. Doctor came in seconds later and told me I had cancer. And it was an absolute lightning bolt out of the blue and kicked off a whole long journey that I'm still on today, thankfully.
So that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, that was 21 and counting now. And at the time, geez,
At the time you said you were married, had just had a kid. Your wife was just had a kid or was pregnant.
oh, we had just had our first daughter. She was 7 months old, and it. One of the interesting things I learned right away is how complex a cancer diagnosis can be. Um, they originally thought I had a type of bone cancer because the type of cancer I do have, which is a bone marrow cancer, can present in ways that look like bone cancer. But I had to undergo months worth of testing and scans and blood work and shuffling between one doctor and the next until they figured out exactly what I had. And that's when I was given a prognosis of possibly as little as a year and a half, maybe if things went really, really well, 3 or 4 years. But since then, I've just sort of miraculously been the beneficiary of just incredible scientific biomedical breakthroughs that have come along specifically for the type of uh, cancer I have that have kept me alive.
And so once you were told, and I mean, this is one of those situations where you see this in movies a lot, and once in a while you talk to your friends, oh, what would happen if I was given a month to live? What would I do? So you're sitting there, I'm assuming late 30s, you have a young kid, you're married, you're doing well, you're up and coming. I think you were at Men's Journal, right?
Right?
Yeah, so the career's going well, you're in New York, and doctor says, "John, sit down. I have some news for you. You have a year and a half to live, maybe a little bit more." And if you're willing, once you heard that, can you just describe what you felt and what you thought?
Yeah, most of us, or many of us anyway, have heard of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. Like,
Yeah.
I immediately went into denial, stage one. The first words out of my mouth, just involuntarily, were literally no, 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 no. Um,
Mm.
and I said, "It's not possible. I have a 7-month-old daughter. This can't be happening." Um, And then, strangely enough, after I sort of oriented myself, at least from the first, massive left hook out of nowhere, um, the first call I made was to my office, to my boss, to tell her that I wasn't going to be able to come into work that day. I was actually working at New York Magazine at the time. Um, and I called, and when I think back on that now, I realize, like, number one, it was another form of denial. I was just trying to pretend nothing big was happening. It's like as if I had, I don't know, a cold or the flu and was just calling in sick for the day. And the other thing I think is I was just trying to avoid telling anybody who I was super close to that it was going to be a million times more difficult to tell. And I didn't tell my boss why I wasn't coming in. I just told her I wasn't coming in. Um, and from there, wow, your mind just starts racing to 100 million places. What's my daughter going to be like? What's going to be like for her to grow up without a dad? What's my wife going to go through to lose a husband? To make matters worse, my wife had lost her father when she was quite young. Um, we've since joked about it once or twice in a black humor kind of way. It's like they say you marry your father. That's not really what they're hoping for. That your husband's going to pass away the same way your father did. Um, if I am well, enough to live, for a while, how am I going to support my family if I can't work? All the sort of big existential questions come rushing right to mind. And those were my first handful of reactions.
And then also, folks, as this is happening, you still have to live because, to paraphrase Robert Frost, life it goes on. But your life, compared to others, is different because you have to live. You have to go to sleep and wake up every day with a guillotine hanging right above your neck. And someone saying, "Well, don't worry about that guillotine. Sure, it nicked you, but it's okay. Live your life. Go have an ice cream, John. Go forth and work." How do you not fall into despair?
Yeah, I did some really interesting research for the book about how people cope with extreme uncertainty or extreme anxiety. And I spoke to a woman, a sociologist named Kate Sweeney at the University of California, Riverside, who's kind of made it her life's work to study this. And she's told me about some fascinating research where people were put in an experiment where they were told they were going to receive a split into two groups. Some were going to receive a small electrical shock, and some were not. Uh, and within minutes, a huge number, I don't remember the exact percentage, of the people said, "Just give me the shock." They couldn't bear waiting. They couldn't bear the uncertainty. So as humans, as a species, we're super bad at that. And so I asked this woman, Kate Sweeney, what do we do? What do you recommend people do? And she said they had some interesting research that things like simple distractions, putting your mind on something else can help. Definitely like doing something that brings you into the so-called flow state, whatever that is for you, knitting, baking, yoga, doesn't matter. If you can get your mind deeply engaged with something else, that can kind of crowd out the anxiety. But ultimately, she said, sort of nothing works. And I said to her, "You're the expert, what do you do?" And she said, "I don't know. I do try all the same things everybody else does, but they don't really help that much either." And so I said, "Well, that's kind of depressing." And she said, "Well, the way I look at it is it helps for people to understand that we all struggle with this. You know, you always feel better when you know you're not the only one experiencing something. So that's what I try to tell people is, you know, some of those things can help for sure. They've helped in my case. Work has been a very welcome distraction for me. I like what I do. It's engaging, it's demanding. I tell people I've barely missed a day of work in 20 years and many, many difficult treatments. They say, "Oh, that's so brave or courageous." And I said, "Believe me, it's got nothing to do with bravery or courage. It's got to do with like maintaining my sanity." Um, and then hobbies too. I happen to be a fly fisherman. Doesn't matter what your thing is, but that's deeply engaging for me. So I do that.
And there's photos of you fly fishing on the streets of New York. Can you just explain that? I saw a photo of you just like sitting there. I'm like, is he on the streets of New York? He is.
I have this crazy habit where I practice my casting. I take the hook off of the fly, so I'm not gonna, you know, impale anyone. Um, and I cast out. I live in downtown Manhattan on 12th Street, and I cast. You know, go out there on usually on a Sunday morning when things are relatively quiet, and I just kind of time my casts to the red light cycle. So when the light is red and there are no cars coming down my one-way street, I sort of hop into the street, maybe make 10 or 20 casts, the light turns green, I step to the side, the cars go by, so on. Believe me, it's drawn many a strange look. You know, New Yorkers have kind of seen everything, but I did have one lady come up to me and said, "You know, I've lived here for 67 years, and this I have never seen." So that was a point of pride for me.
But people might laugh at this because the full title of the book, and I want to break it all down: An Exercise in Uncertainty, a memoir of illness and hope. And we're going to talk about the illness and the cutting edge research, which is very important, especially now as folks. The Trump administration, within the first 6 months of this administration, has cut 30% of the budget on cancer research. There is a goal to dismantle the public health infrastructure, $13 billion attempt to dismantle it. $1 trillion, we already saw cut to Medicaid, which will happen after the midterms, but they're going after the NIH, National Institute of Health. You have cranks and anti-science and anti-vax experts taking over, and some of the best minds, the best scientists, the best thought leaders who come from many foreign countries are now being poached by China and Japan. And just think, if that was happening 20 years ago, a person like John would not be alive. So we're going to talk about the research and the science. But I'm also, believe it or not, John, I don't know if I told you this. I, for the last year, have been researching a book on hope around my family, and I give him the prospectus to my editor who loves it. And I just emailed her yesterday. I said, if it wasn't for fascism, I would have given you the second prospectus on this book. And it's a personal story, much like yours, about our journey with our daughter's battle with survivor with cancer, excuse me, stage 4 cancer. Some of you might know and might not know that almost like 7 years ago, gosh, was it 7 years? Almost 6 years ago. 6 years ago, excuse me. My daughter, who was about to turn 3, was diagnosed with a rare form of stage 4 liver cancer, where the cancer had spread all over her liver and there was a dot on her lung. And she needed a full liver transplant. And I remember when my wife called me, I was about to give a TED talk on the main stage. And just like you, my first involuntary response was no. And I punched the pillow of my bed. And I'm usually very good in crisis. And if for me it was as a father, and I think as a parent or a caretaker, the first prayer to the universe is, all right, God, give it to me. I'll take it. It doesn't work that way. And then the second question, or usually the first or second question, and this is universal because I've talked to a lot of people, is they ask, why me? And the universe doesn't respond. And then I think, like you, we said, okay, this is happening. And my wife and I were like, all right, well, why me is not the right answer or the question, but rather we should be like, what now? What now is the question. And then we decided to implement a plan of action. And having talked to so many experts on hope, a breakdown of hope, one of the if you will, the definitions is hope is optimism with a plan. Right. Hope is a verb. It's an action. Right. I say it's inshallah with a plan. Inshallah means God willing, but there's a great saying in Islam. It's, trust God, but tie your camel first, which is easier to say, it's easier said than done, especially if you have to tire a camel during a friggin' sandstorm. So for you, a memoir of illness and hope, it's really easy for someone to say, and I'm sure you got these people say, all right, Jon, everything happens for a reason. Just have hope, try harder. But you're like, mother effer, I got to time my camel during a tsunami, a sandstorm, a windstorm. How did you have hope, which is an action, during this moment of uncertainty where you were given 18 months to live?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, as you know, I'm familiar with your story, Waj, and as you say, it's my story's been challenging in its own right. There's no other way to say it, but I can't begin to imagine what it's like to go through that with a child. And I send all my best wishes to all of you. To answer your
She's a
question,
cancer survivor as of she turned 9 2 weeks ago. And 2 weeks ago, she officially crossed the 5-year threshold. So she now is officially a cancer survivor. And she was a cancer survivor because of an anonymous liver donor who stepped up and gave a piece of his liver. And also because, in a strange way, Jon, like you, she was lucky enough to be diagnosed with this at a time where there was enough research where, if God forbid, 20 years ago, she was diagnosed with this, it would have been a death sentence. But thanks to research and science and kindness, Nuseba, is now a 9-year-old diva who is a stage 4 cancer survivor. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but continue.
I couldn't think of anything better to be interrupted by, and that's fantastic news, and I'm incredibly happy to hear it. Um, so hope. So you say hope is involves a plan. The way I look at that is optimism with a plan. My phrasing for that has been, realistic optimism or optimistic realism. And what I mean by that is like, I try and live my life I have since I was diagnosed with the idea that, you know, um, there's no reason to believe things won't work out until you're told full stop they're not going to, and there's no chance.
Mm,
If you're in that situation, I'm extremely sympathetic, and I don't mean to suggest that people in that situation ought to behave or think the way I'm going to talk about in a second. That's a world apart from where I've been, even, and I'm very sympathetic to anybody in that situation. But if you do have hope of any kind, um, I'm very reluctant, and you sort of implied this, to get into these ideas of like, well, people say, oh, you've got to have a good attitude. That'll help you, survive. And that's, yeah. I don't doubt that maybe there's something to that, but there's not as much to that as there is to science and research and new drugs and new treatments. I try and be hopeful and optimistic and have a positive attitude just because it makes my life better minute to minute, whether I'm not sick, whether I am, facing a relapse or not facing a relapse, whether I'm about to go into a difficult 6 months of treatment or not going into 6 months of treatment. That isn't to say I don't feel absolutely awful some days and I don't lose hope some days. I'm human, of course. I have my good days and my bad days, but I try and be optimistic for those reasons, not because I think it might improve my outcome necessarily. Um, the other thing I'd say about all that is, you were talking a little bit about, some of the ways people look at what motivates them and what keeps them hopeful. For me, having a 7-month-old daughter was everything I needed. I used to call her my little joy machine. Speaking of distractions, like she was the best possible distraction you could have, right? It's like whatever else was going on, by the time bath time came around or story time, bedtime stories, I could get in that zone, in that, flow state by being with her and taking care of her. And God knows, there's nothing that'll give you reason to live more than a child. As it happens, speaking of hope, my wife and I decided to have a second child in spite of my condition. Almost 5 years later, my son, we had a son. He's 17 now. My daughter's 22. And, that's a conversation you hope to never have when you get married and think about having kids is like, well, should we have a second child? Because if we do, you might wind up, having to raise this child by yourself and, all the difficulties that come with that. But we decided to take a leap of faith there also. And that was 17 years ago in its own right. And now we have an amazing, wonderful son who's another great, source of hope for me and, motivation to keep going. So lastly, on a kind of, I guess, more spiritual level, I'm not a religious person necessarily, but as you were saying, when no atheist in a foxhole, they say, I also say no atheists on a cancer ward.
Yeah.
To think these ways. And I remember on the very first day I was diagnosed, I had this weird thought that if I'm remembering right, and I could be wrong about this, I think you're a Star Wars fan, so you might like
Yeah.
this. I had thought the phrase that popped into my head is like, okay, there's a death force in human existence, and that force has never been closer to me than it is right now in my 38 years at that point to date. Um, it's on the attack, right? It's like right in my face. And that was very shocking and obviously upsetting. But just a moment later, I also had this thought that like there's a life force as well. We all have a survival instinct, and there's lots and baked into us that can help us survive. And I just remember thinking to myself, if only for my own sanity, not as a way of predicting anything, I need to believe in the life force. So
Yeah.
I
And
was
and sorry, go ahead.
no, that's
You
all.
cut out for a second.
I'm not.
No, you have, and it's so interesting. We're talking for the first time about this. We didn't share any notes, and I see a through line between people who have gone through crises or have suffered or endured during moments of uncertainty. And I was a father of a stage 4 cancer survivor. You are still going through it. You have incurable cancer, but here you are, like Superman, still alive 20 years later. But there's a through line, and the through line is so interesting. The way you said it, perhaps because we're both writers, is the way I framed it when I found out that my daughter had stage 4 cancer. I said, okay, I'm not God. I don't know what'll happen. The odds aren't good, but I'll be damned if I just give up. So I'll just keep writing, and we'll write our way out of this. And until I literally see the French letters "fin," that means the story is still going. The page will keep turning, right? And that was my frame of mind when in my book when I talk about just being completely broke, health crisis, parents in jail. And then I had my own near death experience where I had a supraventricular tachycardia. And at the age of 31, I was about to die and they defibrillated me. Once I thank God survived that. That's when I decided with that brush of death, I said, you know, I'm still alive. And then, much like you, Jon, I said, let me try this living thing. And it was that near death experience that actually got me to say, maybe I should invest in a family. And the reason why I didn't invest in a family or relationship, because I was like, well, who would I want to saddle with this baggage, right? This debt, this guy who's put the parents in jail, taking care of his grandmother. And so I threw myself out there and I got married. We've still been married. Our anniversary is coming up for 13 years, right? So it's the choice you make in those moments of uncertainty. Do you choose the death force or the life force? Do you choose the story of apathy and cynicism, or do you expose yourself to potential disappointment, but say, you know what, I'll still invest in hope, which can be so painful. And hope, like I said, is optimism with a plan of action. And someone asked me during I saw it during the threads, the saying within Islam is, yeah, have faith in God and also tie your camel, right? So do everything you can within your powers, exhausting yourself with your own actions and put your faith in God. And I think what you did also on your own is, okay, I have this death sentence, but I'm still alive. I haven't died yet. Let me keep on living. And I think that mindset, folks, if you think, oh, it's only Jon and Waj, I want to remind you because I think we've kind of retconned these 2 years of our lives. Oh, a pandemic, a once in a life pandemic where many of us did not know if we would live or die. I think we've gone through this, Jon. I think people, without realizing they've gone through this already, we've retconned it because America hates talking about death, if you've noticed. But there was that moment, Jon, where my daughter was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. My wife was pregnant at the time. So we just found out that my wife was pregnant with our third kid. And then, like a month later, we found this out. And then 3 months later, pandemic. So that was happening. And I remember Ted and New York Times asked me to write an article. I did a speech for Ted. I said my second speech, and I wrote an article in the New York Times. They're like, man, we've seen how you've maintained hope during the pandemic with your daughter and your wife's pregnant. Can you just give us tips? And I wrote this article, which was 3 tips for having hope in hopeless times. And one of the tips was, find anything in your life that gives you moments of joy, no matter how ridiculous, whether it's making pottery, whether it's drawing, Whether it's fly fishing in the middle of the New York street, you need to find these moments where you feel like you are in control of your life and you have joy. And that is so critical as you're on this journey towards uncertainty. And lo and behold, you ended up doing the same thing with the fly fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to what you were talking about for before about you know, uh, have faith in God, but tie your camel. I've also had faith in my doctors and in science, and that's a story. And you know, finding the right doctors, I'm lucky with a capital L to have good medical insurance and to be able to afford it. As it is, I've spent hundreds of of dollars on my own medical care out of pocket. But had I not had good medical insurance, I'd be broke 50 times over. So, there,
Absolutely.
but
And
getting
can I say, John, before, because I want to ask you about this, I always tell people as well, and I say it in every single speech, and my wife says it because she's a doctor, is that yes, people talk about spirituality, and yes, people talk about our mindset, and yes, people talk about hope, but we were very lucky to have insurance. And because of insurance through my wife, we got great medical care. And we were also lucky to have a community. Folks, even with me and my wife, we had to raise $200,000 GoFundMe in the United States of America, John. Without that $100,000 that I got, I'd be completely broke as broke. And we were lucky to be the beneficiaries of brilliant doctors here in the DMV area who took care of my daughter. And I think that's a very important point that you and I are both stressing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have the hope, have the prayers, have the community, but also, health insurance and doctors who know what the F they're doing. I did not mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to compliment the point where I see where you're going with this. Take it away, John.
I couldn't agree with everything you said more. And again, couldn't be happier to be interrupted. Uh, but yeah, where I'm going with it next is to the point you were raising earlier about, the current administration's, actions with respect to biomedical research. And, people sometimes say to me when I talk about this, oh, I don't want to get political. Let's stick to your story. And I don't see it as politics. I just see it as humanity. You're talking
Mm.
about taking away life-saving research, and think about what that term means. Sometimes you hear that and it's sort of like a banality. It's like wallpaper. By taking away this money, you are very directly costing people their lives. Let's just be frank about that. There is no doubt in my mind. I am living, walking, breathing proof that that money saves people's lives. It has saved my life. Almost every drug and treatment I've had, and I researched, all the history of these treatments and how they were developed for my book, was developed at least in part with federal funding. And I don't at the same time want to minimize the importance of private donations, more important than ever now that we're experiencing
Absolutely.
funding crisis. And I'm, obviously a huge advocate for whatever people can afford to give to these causes. I'm donating a portion of the proceeds from the book to cancer research, and couldn't believe in it more. At the same time, we live in a country that can afford to fund this research, and choosing not to me is just, as I say, it's not a political issue, it's just a human issue.
Yeah, it's a death cult, and my wife and I have tried our best. We've been asked about this for several years, and my wife and I independently, people talk about again the community and spirituality and the mindset. And I want to stress health insurance. I don't have health insurance, John. I have it through my wife, and my wife has health insurance because she's a professor and a doctor. And without health insurance, Nuseba had no chance. And not only without health insurance, without the best doctors. We're here, we got Georgetown Children's Hospital, right? So you need the entire ecosystem, folks. You need the infrastructure. You need a public health infrastructure. You need a country that cares about its citizens, that gives them health insurance and access to doctors. You need a community of empathy and care and storytelling, right? We got all of that. But without the actual health insurance, without access to doctors and experts, without access to, oh, I don't know, surgeons who knew what they were doing,
And
John,
medical research to develop these.
and the medical research, right? And also they took folks, they took a portion of my daughter's liver, and they said, if you don't mind, can we study it? And because we want to get better and better, and we want to be able to treat this better and diagnose this better. And for those who are joining us, the people. I'm talking to Jon Gluck, the author of the new memoir on exercise and uncertainty, a memoir of illness and hope. Cancer survivor right in front of you, incurable cancer. He was given 18 months to live 20 years ago. He still has the cancer, but he still has just amazing research and science. You know, it's this it's this research that is so important because, as I was telling John, if my daughter, God forbid, uh, had the same cancer 20 years ago, she'd be dead. She'd be dead just because the research wasn't there, right? And so we're living in a country now, John, where with the Republican big billionaire bill to pay for tax cuts for the rich, to add $3 trillion to the debt and give $180 billion to ICE, they have cut $1 trillion from Medicaid, which means that rural hospitals will shut down, which means nursing homes will shut down, which means some of the most marginalized people will lose access to healthcare and they will die. And for folks who are joining us late, another tidbit that I always try to tell people is in the 6 months of a Trump administration, they have already cut 30% of the cancer research budget. And the plan is to do a $12 to $13 billion gutting of the public health infrastructure. And with the attack on immigrants and the attack on scholarship, we have China and Japan literally poaching our best scientists and talent. All of it's going away. So, John, imagine you're living through it, and you are the recipient of the most cutting edge science, right? Can you tell people, like you were just briefly mentioning to me, like each and every time you're at the end of your rope, new science. And they're like, John, will you be our halal guinea pig? And that's why you're still here.
Been really immersed, and I use that word carefully. I mean, when I was first diagnosed, once I got the proper diagnosis of the first oncologist I saw said to me, we can't cure this, but we can treat it. And obviously, in one sense, you're very unlucky to have this diagnosis, but I also want you to know you're lucky in the sense that a lot of new drugs for exactly what you have in the pipeline right now. And it's really, a promising time. And I thought he was just blowing smoke, and that trying to give me, make me feel good, give me a little bit of hope. Um, but it turned out he was exactly right. I didn't even realize this myself exactly until I started researching the book and putting together the timetable in a very detailed and careful way. But as you say, pretty much every time I've needed a new treatment, something has come along. And in some cases, that's been just to back up half a step. Basically, the course of what's happened to me is I get sick, I get treated, I go into remission, sometimes briefly, sometimes for a long period, sometimes a partial remission, sometimes a complete remission. But then I get sick again, I get treated again, same thing, remission, sick, and so on. Almost every time I've needed a new treatment, something new has come along. In some cases, with like uncanny precision. I mean, there have been times where the new drug that I went on was approved by the FDA less than a year previously.
Wow. Wow.
And then 2 summers ago now, almost 2 years to the date, I had by far the most advanced and experimental treatment I've had, something called CAR T therapy. And that treatment was only approved in patients like me 18 months before I had it. And that's an absolutely mind blowing kind of futuristic treatment where essentially what they do is they take your T cells, which are a fundamental part of your immune system, out of your blood. They spin them in a centrifuge, separate them from the rest of your blood. They send them to a lab. The lab engineers them. I'll just keep it simple for now with a substance that can, then they put this engineered cells back into your body. And that substance that's been attached, that molecule that's been attached to your T cells, can hunt down your cancer cells and
Wow.
that newly bioengineered cell to your cancer cells. And at the same time, that T cell has been turbocharged, for lack of a better term, to be extra powerful in attacking those cancer cells. So it's this incredibly targeted therapy that's not as damaging to healthy cells as chemotherapy, which, as you know, kind of, carpet bombs everything, good and bad. Hey,
Nancy just called it like Pac-Man. And I'm like, yeah, it's like Pac-Man.
right. Wow, wow.
Yeah.
And, that treatment, as I say, was only approved in patients like me roughly 18 months before I needed it. And, without that treatment alone, I wouldn't be here today. And the same has been true for many of the other treatments.
They're gutting the FDA. They're gutting the National Institute of Health. They're going after cancer research. They're going after scientists. The doctor who operated on my daughter's donor was a European immigrant. And I said, and then, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, he probably wouldn't be here, right? Uh, I mean, it's the type of dismantling, the deliberate, intentional dismantling of our public health infrastructure. The National Weather Service, folks, let's not forget what's happening in Central Texas. Enough data is out that due to the dismantling of our government agencies and expertise, deaths could have been prevented in Central Texas, folks. Children died in Central Texas. Children died. It was a massive failure, top down, bottom up, right? Because they're dismantling all these agencies and removing all these experts whose job it is to save lives. And they don't care, John, and which is why I call it a pro-death cult. I'm willing to go political. You don't have to echo these words, but it's a pro-death cult. People like RFK now, being the head of our Health and Human Services, people who believe in eugenics, survival of the fittest, right? I'm not making this up, folks. Just listen to them. This type of, we need to protect the productive people. Well, John, 20 years ago, would be one of the unproductive people, according to Elon Musk and RFK. He's been pretty damn productive, folks. He's survived for 20 years. He's kept writing, has barely missed a day of work, had a kid, had another kid, married to the same woman. Why? Because of, yes, luck, but also medicine, science, doctors, research, right? It is a remarkable nihilistic worldview that this current administration and its enablers have, that they're completely willing to sacrifice future generations. And someone said this in the comments. Cancer comes for everyone, John. I watch movies, as you know, I love horror movies. I'm going to paraphrase a great quote from Alien, the first Alien, where Ash the robot talks about the xenomorph and said, it's like the perfect killing organism, just like intentional, without care of morality or distraction, right? And I said it's like cancer. Cancer plays for all the marbles. So it's like a perfect killing machine. It comes for anyone and everyone, right? And the people who are dismantling it assume that they'll be okay, John. And I'm like, what happens if, God forbid, you get cancer or your loved ones get cancer and you don't have the means or the resources to ship them to Japan or friggin' China? Uh, I don't know. I'm sorry for my rant, but I sit there and I get so pissed off because I saw, John, I'll give an example, a personal example. You used to go to the hospital and you mentioned that cycle, and I feel so bad for you, right? And we had the cycle with my daughter. Go get the chemo. She has to recover. You take her home. What happens with chemo is it attacks your body. The white blood cells get ravaged. As soon as there's a fever, what do, John? Go straight to the hospital. Why? Because as soon as you get the fever, you know that the body on its own is not capable of, of defending against any diseases. So you're in the hospital. You get the platelets. You get the blood. You're in the hospital for a week. The numbers go up, the fever's down, you release them back. You wait for a while. You hope the cancer goes away. Cancer doesn't go away. Then you go again for what? Chemo. Same cycle. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. But a really interesting point there is once Nuseba had that fever, where do we go? To the hospital. To the hospital. And why were we able to go to the hospital? Because of insurance. And so, John, I do think your book is really important because not only does it make the case for hope, but it also makes the case for science and research and doctors and health insurance, which is being actively dismantled as we speak. Sorry for my rant. I yield the floor back to you.
No, I appreciate your rant for sure. I talk a good bit about health insurance in the book, and you know, where I net out on the whole thing. I had this line that came to me as I kind of concluded all the material about how difficult and maddening it can be to cut through all the red tape of prior authorizations and denials and then fighting over mistakes, and you're at your lowest as it is, and you're suddenly called upon to fight with bureaucrats. It's an absolutely insane system. And I had this line, that, and I've had over the years, by changing jobs or being on my wife's insurance, just about every major insurance there is, the whole alphabet soup from Anthem to United Healthcare, and everything in between, and Cigna and Oxford and all of them. And I kind of came to this thought as I was writing the book that, you know, uh, insurance companies are like airlines. The worst one is the one you're on at that moment, and I still feel that way. It's just there's no such thing as a health insurance company that's run compassionately.
That's right.
They're run for profit. I have no beef with capitalism in general, with insurance companies in general. What I have a beef with is excessive greed and excessive, exploitation of patients and shoving all this burden onto people who, as I say, are at their most vulnerable at the time they least need to be burdened by anything else. And, for the sake of a CEO getting paid an extra $20 million when he's already making 150 or 200 million, that to me doesn't add up. I'm nobody's idea of an economic radical, but that just seems excessive to me. And reining that in to a point with reasonable regulations, and greater oversight of that industry to make sure that there's more compassionate treatment of patients, and that a lot of the cut, and that a lot of these denials are forbidden, basically. That all just seems, again, like good basic common sense and a decent human thing to do. Never mind which part of side of the political aisle you come from.
And I was luckier than you, John, that I married a doctor. She's a family med doctor, a really good doctor, and her father's a doctor, and her brother is a doctor. So I think about this often. I'm not that smart, but I'm not that dumb. But cancer is so overwhelming. And then you also have to live your life. Life, it does not stop. Life does not care that you have cancer, right? So you got to pay your bills. You had a son, you have to raise your son. You have your wife, you got the job, and oh yeah, you've given 18 months to live, and you have to figure out all this stuff, right? So I at least had this knowledge base within my own family where I was able to ask my wife. I mean, folks, I was so ignorant about cancer that once they told me your daughter has stage 4 cancer, my first question was, is that one of the good stages? And my wife was like, that's the worst stage. It has metastasized. And then my wife said she needs a liver transplant. And I said, who the hell will be dumb enough to give their liver to our daughter and die? And she goes, no, silly, you give a piece of your liver. I'm like, you can do that? And my wife said, yeah, the liver grows back. I'm like, the liver grows back? Like basic stuff I didn't know, John. And then when you come to all these doctors telling you all these like medicines, it is overwhelming, right? So imagine not having that knowledge base. Then imagine not having access to that knowledge base. And then my wife said this, John. My wife is a doctor, folks. I was thinking, all right, I'm an ignorant English major. What do I know? So I said to my wife, Sarah, I said, surely you understand health insurance because I don't get it. My wife says, I don't understand this shit either. Doctors don't. It's so freaking confusing. Our system sucks. And I'm like, awesome. That makes me feel so much worse. So it's even my wife saying this, folks. So imagine the average Jose, the person out there who's struggling. It doesn't have to be this way, folks. That's what John and I are saying. It doesn't have to be this way. John mentioned this is the richest, most powerful country on earth, and we have one of the most inefficient healthcare systems. And, a Luigi Mangione, and I do not condone vigilante violence, but Luigi Mangione got radicalized. Why? Because one of the major debts of Americans, one of the major reasons why they go into bankruptcy is healthcare debt. And United Healthcare that you mentioned has the record of denying more claims than any other health insurance company. And they're doing it in such a cavalier way that now they're using AI. It does not have to be this way. John and I are the lucky beneficiaries of science, of health insurance, of luck. But so many people, John, are not lucky. So many people are not lucky, right? And this is why I think my story, my daughter's story, and your story is so important. It's not to say, all right, folks, we are the lucky ones, yes, and here's how to have hope during hopeless times. But also, your book is a plea to change the system and to have more research and more science and more funding. Talk to us about that aspect, that Trojan horse of your book.
Yeah, I'll just stick with the insurance issue for a second. You're saying on this,
You cut out for a second. You said, I'll stick with the insurance issue for a bit, and then you cut out for a second.
sorry. Am I good
Now
again?
I got you again. I got you again.
Your wife, even as a doctor, didn't understand this stuff. I've had that experience also. It's like you're sitting there and the insurance company either denies a procedure or a test. and they give you a bunch of gobbledygook words and word salad to explain their reasoning, and you can't begin to understand it, and they have the right to appeal. And so then you ask your doctor to appeal, but very often doctors' offices are overwhelmed now with all this bureaucracy also. And it might take them days or weeks to get around to even filing that appeal. And then it takes the insurance company days or weeks or even months to respond to the appeal. I mean, it got so bad with me trying to triangulate all this. I was on a first name basis with the pre-authorization coordinators just about every office I went to. And when you're, cancer with a patient with a very complex cancer, you have many, many doctors. So even something as simple as that, we've got to have a better system for how three parties, patient, physician, and insurance company, communicate. That ought to be solvable, right? And probably wouldn't even cost that much money. It's just that everybody just kind of throws their hands up and expects that the other person's going to take care of it. And that alone is, something I've tried to call attention to.
The bureaucracy, right? The maddening bureaucracy, because we're going through it right now. Even though my daughter's a cancer survivor, folks, she has another person's liver. So she's on medication for the rest of her life, unless, inshallah, there's some breakthroughs, right? And so even paying for these medicines, even, scheduling some of these, what they call the scanxiety. This every time you have cancer, scanxiety, you got to go for scans and checkups, right? But, my wife sits there and she's a doctor. And she's like, "Oh, it's so maddening." And I outsource this to my wife. I'm like, "I'll do the other stuff because I don't understand this shit," right? So this is my wife who's a doctor who's just banging her head trying to go through the bureaucracy, trying to figure out why they charge us for something they shouldn't have charged us, right? And then you also have to go through this, John, because again, you're not a cancer survivor. In a way you are, but you still have incurable cancer. So you're on this like Groundhog's Day cycle, and the maddening bureaucracy of it all. And you sit there, and much like you, and you've been in a much worse situation because you're actively going through it. Our daughter is a cancer survivor, but again, she has a foreign tissue in her body, which is why she needs this medication for life. But it's that maddening realization, John, that you just talked about, where you sit there and go, it doesn't have to be this way. And then you sit there and ask yourself, and you and me aren't doctors, why the F is it this way? Like, this is the wealthiest country on earth. And then I'm sure you and I have traveled Canada, Europe. One of the questions I get asked all the times, folks, in Europe, there's three questions. Number one, why are you all so obsessed with guns? Number two, uh, why do you all hate black people so much? Number three, why are you people not revolting that you don't have free healthcare and education, even though you all pay taxes? The last one, they literally do not understand, John. They're like, you all pay taxes, right? I'm like, yes. And you're perfectly fine with your government not giving you affordable healthcare and like school. Why? And I'm like, very good question. We're a very self-destructive country. I have no idea why. As things are, John, as things are getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm going to ask you a political question. Answer it if you want to or not. On Medicare for all, I was not necessarily on the fence. I just didn't know. But I was like, it sounds like a good idea. Uh, but more and more now, especially what's with happening in the oligarchy, I'm like, F it, man. Medicare for all. Like, why not? If
Yeah.
they're the wealthiest country on earth, like, why is this not a right that every U.S. citizen who pays his taxes should not get free, excellent, affordable healthcare in the United States of America?
Yeah. I mean, I and that I'm an expert on the US health insurance system. I'm an expert on my experience with it, but I'm not a policy wonk. But
Neither am I. I'm just asking you, like, your experience, just basics. Even like, we don't have to get into policy because I'm not a policy wonk either. But like, shouldn't this be a right for every American?
that's what I'm getting at is, I can point to any one solution, whether it's Medicare for all or another solution, or any of the many solutions that have been proposed. All I know is the way it is now is plain old wrong. Um,
Hmm.
to have a way to cover people, in an effective. We've got to have a way to get rid of all this red tape that people have to go through when they're at their worst and most vulnerable. And there's got to be a way to figure out a system that is more compassionate and more comprehensive. The specifics of that we could have 5 other shows on, I suppose, but I certainly stand behind that idea.
Yeah, same here. And I'm like you. If I have those five other shows, I want to actually invite experts because that's not my expertise. I want to learn. I sincerely want to know. I'm not wedded to any idea, but this system is broken. And John and I were the lucky beneficiaries of science, of healthcare, of cutting edge research, of doctors who were smart, of doctors who cared. A community, and a community doesn't necessarily mean, folks, a religious or ethnic community. A community can be two or three people, friends and family, a community that cared about us, the fact that we were able to work and take care of our family, the fact that we had the right mindset and chose life and chose the life force. But the book, for the 900 people who are joining us, is Jon Gluck's memoir, An Exercise in Uncertainty, a memoir of illness and hope that chronicles how he learned to accept that he has this rare form of incurable cancer. He was given 18 months to live 20 years ago, and he chose life instead. To quote Trainspotting, choose life. But he was able to choose life thanks to cutting edge scientific research. And every couple of months, every time they told him, hey, you're about to be done, through luck, kismet, chance, God, but whatever you want to say, a cutting edge research just literally presented itself and said, "Hey, John, you want to try this out?" He goes, "Sure." And he's been alive for 20 years. But his book, in addition to talking about his journey, his story, the exercises that he has done to have hope, and life and love during a lifetime of uncertainty, the portions of the book, John, you touched upon it, also go to scientific research. And I'm trying to make a pitch to sell your book. Uh, the portion of the book sales will go to this research. Can you tell people why it's so important to read and also to buy this book?
Yeah, I mean, as far as reading the book, I think that whether you've gone through a cancer diagnosis or a loved one has, if you're in that situation, the book I think has maybe even if you've gone through a different illness or any life experience, large or small, health related or otherwise, I think some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, as you say, about your life full and hopefully fulfilling way, are applicable to anybody. I think some of the lessons I've learned about how to cope with certainty or difficult any sort are, useful to anyone and even inspiring. And now I've forgotten what your second question was.
The research, the portion of the book sales that go to research.
Far as more direct reason to buy the book goes, I am donating a portion of all proceeds from the book directly to cancer research, and at a time when that's more important than ever, as I was saying earlier, because of the cuts to federal funding for biomedical research. People developing these drugs and treatments are more dependent than ever on everyday folks like us, and I'm trying to do my part. And by buying the book, you'd be helping me by doing your part as well.
Yeah, the Trump administration, for those who are joining us late, has already made 30% of cuts to cancer research. 30%. So apparently it's not important. One of the major killers of humanity all around the world. And Sandy's comment, I read that. I don't think John disagrees with you. I don't either. When it comes to capitalism, our rant on the healthcare system, this is, greed. It's greed. It's unfettered capitalism, right? Capitalism, the way it's being performed right now, that's just barbarity and brutality, in my opinion. Right? This is a profit by any means necessary. If that's your definition of capitalism, then yeah, I'm not down with that. And this is just human greed, folks. Human greed right now. And we're not policy experts when it comes to healthcare, but as people who have gone through the healthcare system, as the father of a cancer survivor, and John is a cancer survivor, what we can tell you wholeheartedly is the system that we have right now. That system is broken, and that system needs to be reformed. Folks, thank you for joining us. I had John on much longer than I thought. John, show your book. Shamelessly promote the book. You have a copy of the book? Show people.
I committed the biggest error of author interviews, and I don't have it right on me. Should I step away for 1 second and grab it, or
Yes, yes. Hire me as your publicist. The book is called An Exercise in Uncertainty, a memoir of illness and hope. For the folks who joined us late, I will have this entire conversation later today on the left hook. It's been about a 45-minute conversation with John. John was diagnosed with rare form of incurable cancer, 20 years ago, was given 18 months to live. But along the way, folks, like a video game character, he just finds a one up. There you go. The book came out last month. And, that's John fly fishing. And John is notorious. If you go to New York, you'll see a man in the streets fly fishing. That's John, because one of the ways that he has found I wouldn't say distract, to just live. I would say live is because we all live through it. We life is uncertain, folks. No one's guaranteed anything. And so the way John has found a way to find meaning in life is to, commit himself to his family, his children, to life, to love, to work. He has two kids now, healthy and grown. And he's like, it's the small things in life that people might mock or laugh that gives you meaning and purpose and control during uncertain times, right? And for John, it's picking up that what is it called? The line, the yeah, and just casting it out in the middle of New York. For me, during the pandemic and going through my daughter's cancer, it was, I know you might laugh, it was building Lego sets. I'd never built a Lego set in my life. And my son came up to me and said, Baba, build this 1,000-piece dragon. I'm like, oh shit. And then next thing you know, I'm freaking building the Millennium Falcon. Or was learning my mother's recipes and cooking for my family, or was running, or reading. So everyone has something, folks. And the book gives you lessons on how to have hope during uncertain times, but also the book is a testament to the need for research and science and healthcare for everyone. Just because Jon and I are the recipients of good luck doesn't mean we have to be the rare outliers. Our story does not have to be the exception. The story should be the rule. So, folks, I hope this was helpful. You have to buy the book. The book is an exercise illness and hope. Sorry, that's the book. I'll have this whole conversation up in about an hour or two, and I'll link to the book. This has been The Left Hook. I have no paywalls. Everything is for free. So if you have a few bucks, become a paid subscriber. I got a couple of kids. If you don't have enough money, buy John's book. And then turn around and, next month or maybe 2 months later, come in and become a paid subscriber. It's only $5 a month. At the very least, subscribe and share this news and content if you think it'll help people, if you think it'll help some people in policy, if you think it'll help push the needle, as they're actively, and by they I mean the Trump administration, folks, and I say this without hyperbole, is actively trying to dismantle our public health infrastructure. This is where we are right now, folks. So stories like John's are more important than ever. And if you buy John's book, a portion of the sales go to cancer research, which is actively being gutted by this administration. Jon, final word to you, sir.
Yeah, I guess, a lot of times people say to me, what advice do you have for people, having gone through all of, and I usually just say, listen, when I was diagnosed with cancer and got a very poor prognosis, I didn't think I would survive. I did. I didn't think I could handle everything I imagined I was going to have to go through. It turns out I could. And so I think, my message is basically, you know, uh, better things sometimes happen than you think, and you're probably stronger and more capable than you think you are. And those can be very inspiring messages, even if you're facing a rather dark circumstance.
Amen. And as a writer, the way I framed it in my life through our numerous challenges is until I see the end, I'll keep writing. And you don't know if the next page will bring a plot twist that might turn the winds in your favor. And that's happened to me time and time again in life.
We really do think the same way. I had a little bit in the book where I talk about, at one point, I thought of cancer as a death sentence, and now I think of it as a book, chat with many chapters, ending yet not yet written. So, I think that's the writer's habit of mind.
Yeah, the writers have it in mind. Like we all reach an end, folks. We each owe a death, but we don't know when. So until that time, if I can write my way out of it and write a better story, why not? We can only do which is in our control. And going back to that great saying, yeah, inshallah is great, but tie your camel first. and do everything you can with your own hands. And that also means that our country has to do better when it comes to giving healthcare to its citizens, folks. Thank you, Jon. Thanks for the book. This has been The Left Hook. I'll be back at 4 o'clock. We're going to go back to some sad news, Jon. I'm talking to a really interesting investigative journalist. He did this fantastic work for Mother Jones, Leland Nally. And this stuff's been out for years. He called every single name in Epstein's Black Book. Leland Nally. He'll be with us at 4 o'clock. Jon, great seeing you, buddy. First time we actually talked in person. Jon was my editor when I was at the Medium, and he had a budget. I'll never forget this. Jon said, "I have a budget. Just sign on to become a columnist. I can give you money." And that money really did help me, Jon, because I was trying to rebuild, again, cancer. You know how much it costs. So, being a columnist for Medium and Daily Beast at that time, writing 8 columns a month, gave me a little bit of extra income that really helped my family. So thank you, sir, for believing in my voice.
Thanks for having me on, Waj. I really appreciate it.
Take care, everyone. Don't be a fascist.